Tonight, of course, is Andy Lloyd, author and ufologist. Welcome to the show, Andy. Glad you could make it tonight.
Thanks very much, Colin. Great to be on the show this evening.
Before we get to the body of the show, I'm hearing all kinds of reports of torrential rain in northern England, Andy, and southern England scorching from heat. So I hope everything's okay in your area.
Yeah, we've had quite a drought condition. I mean, British weather is never predictable, as I'm sure you're very aware. And they have said down the years that if global warming is to be believed, and I've got an open mind on that, that will be the weather pattern of the future, that there will be wet times in the summer up north and very dry and more continental in the south. So what seems to have happened now is that London just bakes like Paris.
Right.
And London, people associate London, they used to associate London with smog and fog, and now they associate it with rain. And really speaking, it's become almost continental. It's a lot drier and a lot hotter in the summer than it used to be. And up north they get all the rain, so they have floods up there and drought down here. And for such a small island, it's quite a strange duality.
So you have noticed over the last 8, 10, 15 years, Andy, that these weather patterns have been changing?
Well, insofar as you can notice any pattern to the British climate at all, because it is so unpredictable. Here in Gloucester, where I lived 3 years ago, we had such torrential floods that the whole county almost got evacuated, and down the bottom of my road, there were canoeists cycling along the road. I mean, it was absolutely insane, and we had an incredible, and then this year it's dry and drought-like, and it's a very unpredictable thing, but if global warming really does happen, and I do believe that there's a lot of solar stuff connected with it as well as the man-made things, and things possibly connected with the dark star that we're going to talk about as well. If that's the case, then I prefer to be living in a northern climate where we are. Because if it heats up here, we'll be growing wine. The vineyards will be flourishing once again, and British wine will be the toast of the world.
And the British garden community would once again flourish. I mean, very exotic greenery, I would think. Yeah,
it's quite ironic that Brits are one of the great worriers about global warming. We worry. We do the worrying for the world, the British. But in actual fact, a warm climate here would actually benefit us. The amount of deaths during the winter would decrease, and would more than offset the amount of deaths during the summer from overheating. And we actually stand to benefit from it, unless, of course, the seas rise, and so the east of the country will be swallowed up. But apart from that minor detail, it's all good.
Yeah, well, we are currently working on a Tesla special, and I got to tell you, we've uncovered some startling facts about governments around the world developing methods to affect the weather and the natural balance and ecosystem of countries. Has there been any whisper out there in the UK regarding weather manipulation at all?
Well, I guess we often hear about cloud busting and the kind of chemicals that go up into the air. And, of course, we on Cosmic Conspiracies have kept a close eye down the years on things like coming out of the back of the aeroplanes, it seems to be forming cloud cover. And when the volcanic eruption in that incredibly difficult to enunciate volcano in Iceland went off and blocked off earlier a few months ago, the thing that we all really noticed here is that we could go out into our garden and look up in the sky, and we had blue skies. And there was no cloud, and it's remarkable to see just how much of the cloud is created by the planes that come in and out of Heathrow Airport. It's remarkable, and to see blue skies, I think it must be the first time for 40 years that anyone could see purely blue skies.
Funny you should mention that, because right after 9/11, when the North American skies were cleared of aeroplanes, there was a lot of reports regarding the atmospheric conditions, that the skies were clear, that there were no clouds, there was no chemtrails, no nothing. Now, I have a scientist friend in the New York area who has continuously attempted to get me to look into chemtrails on airplanes. And the more we look into it, the more complicated it gets. And it's one of those issues that is so difficult to broadcast without looking at charts and maps and paper. You can't visually, or you can't audioly bring it to the public very easily, and it's a difficult thing to, for people to get their head around, that these chemtrails could be government organized. There could be a reasoning behind it. And my scientist friend in New York has a lot of theories as to what they are feeding the Earth for. So, what are they feeding the Earth for? What are the chemtrails all about? Well, we will be looking at that in the fall, along with weather patterns, along with the Tesla project. So the weather, although unpredictable in England, is bringing its wrath on the countryside. As Andy said about the flooding, remember, most of northern England, northeast England anyway, portions of Britain are below sea level. And flooding is a regular occurrence, And if the oceans do rise due to global warming for whatever reason, who knows what the UK will look like in the near future. And as I said in the fall, we have a special show on the weather manipulation using the Tesla projects. And of course, we're getting government denial from those projects, but we're going ahead with the show anyway. The weather patterns and chemtrails, two great shows are scheduled for this fall. So we do invite you to keep checking the listings as we start booking for the fall season. So let's listen to more of the Night Zone UK with guest Andy Lloyd, the author of The Dark Star, Planet X. We're going to talk about the Dark Star. Now, if I wander, you pull me back onto a point, and if you wander, I'll do the same thing. And maybe we can get through this, because it's a deep subject. We can go in a million directions with the Dark Star. Basically, stories and prophecies, somewhere out there in the vast universe is a planet that has affected Earth on a frequent basis. It continues its perpetual orbit around and through our system. Some people are calling it Nibiru, some call it Planet X, but tonight's show we'll call it the Dark Star. What's this all about, Andy?
I guess the idea of a missing planet is about as mythical as dragons and so on. I mean, it's an archetypal idea, really, and certainly in the world of science fiction. But like all really, really good myths, it could well actually have a very strong basis in fact. And if that is the case, I do believe it is, then the presence of the Dark Star at the edge of the solar system, very, very long way away, I have to say, but would actually solve a lot of problems in ufology, and would solve a lot of the sort of reasons why people object to the ideas of, say, UFOs, because it provides an opportunity for life to exist in our solar system, allowing intelligent life to visit us from a relatively sort of nearby platform that's habitable, and yet unseen at this time. So that's one of the bases why I think there's a tremendous appeal to this. The second reason why there's a tremendous appeal to this is because this planet is thought to return, and is spoken of in mythology, but also in quite a lot of the sort of scriptural texts and so on that people are obviously very interested in that have been passed down to us from ancient times. So it has a fairly deep-rooted appeal to us in the West, and where the myths of things like the flood and so on sort of grow around the world or extend around the world, it sort of pops up in all of those as well. So it's an exciting proposition, and as a sort of trained scientist, I have a sort of a vested interest in trying to prove the existence of this thing, or to disprove the existence of this thing, in order to solve some of the tremendous mysteries that you and I and so many other people are fascinated in.
Now this Planet X, I discussed this matter with a number of experts. Marshall Masters, CNN science correspondent, he has Planet X forecast websites up there, and I've also talked with Mr. Shaw with the Torah code and the incoming Nibiru, the planet. It's like you say, the tie-ins, I think, give you pause for cause. It makes you want to know definitively if there is a dark star or if there is a planet incoming. Do we have any real scientific evidence showing any gravity variance or anything like that?
I'm sort of very acquainted with Marshall Masters because he and I used to work reasonably closely together with some of these particular points. And his interest is clearly in events that may occur around about the 2012-2013 time, which ties in with the Mayan calendar and the sort of prophecies that may come out of the end of the Mayan age around about that time. And my particular interest, of course, is in the science and in looking at evidence within the solar system which points to the existence of this body. So there are areas where our interests coalesce, and there are areas where we differ in our opinions. My opinion is that the object remains a very distant object at this time, and lies between the Kuiper belt, which is a sort of second asteroid belt beyond Neptune, and the sort of inner Oort cloud, which is a cloud of comets much, much further out. And there's a sort of a gap between these two zones, which I believe is the sort of kingdom of this dark star. So it's a binary companion that's located at that distance. And there are a number of anomalies to do with the outer solar system, to do with the bodies in the outer solar system, and some of the forces that go on out there that indicate that things are not the way science currently describes them or would like to see them. And those anomalies point to the existence of something out there that they have yet to find. And in actual fact, at the moment, scientists are engaged in a very active exploration of that area using an infrared device known as WISE, and are hopeful, some of them are hopeful, the ones from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory anyway, are quite hopeful of discovering this object before 2013.
2013. Now that's there's the number. Is it 2012 to 2013? And it comes in two different ways if you start looking at it. This area of time. Now the area of time is the argument, and we've gone around this circle a number of times. But depending on which calendar. Now the Old Testament clearly was not written with the Julian calendar in mind, or the Roman Greco calendar, or even the Mayan calendar for that matter. The Old Testament was written upon a time that doesn't exist anymore. And now we are trying desperately to take those stories and fit them into time, space that makes sense. And as Andy said, you're looking at 212, 213, somewhere in there that this is going to happen. There will be changes upon our life. I don't think it's going to be catastrophe. I don't think we're going to be destroyed. I do think we're going to be tested.
The timing of that, to do with the end of the Mayan Age, it may not be that this planet sort of comes crashing our way,
right,
but the discovery of the existence of that body may actually coincide with the end of an age and, in a way, create a new era of understanding about our origins and the nature of the solar system.
Yeah, we've talked extensively with John Hogue from Hogue Prophecies regarding the 2012 Mayan end and what's to come after 2012. And his explanation is that it's not, it is the end of an age, but it's the beginning of a new age of enlightenment. That it's a matter of knowing, not guessing, not wondering, but actually knowing. And our scientific experiments are going to come to fruition, and we are going to know what our history was, which I find is fascinating. Now, your book on the dark star, it's based on the planet X, on the scientific evidence. There's also a couple of twists and turns in the book, which I really don't want to explain outright, because I want people to pick up the book.
Yeah, I kind of tried to attack this subject in two different ways. One of them is to produce a book, which is, as you say, The Dark Star, which is a sort of essentially non-fiction book, an alternative knowledge book, where I produce an alternative paradigm based upon anomalies and quirkiness that is otherwise ignored by science, and use that to try and explain things, try and explain sort of the ice age eras and changes to our Earth, changes to our planet, and anomalies within the solar system to do with this body out there. So that's part of my work, and The Dark Star was published in 2005, and it's been very popular, and a lot of people consider that to be sort of a standard text now to do with Planet X. And then in the sort of Dan Brown tradition, I thought about that and thought, well, this obviously has an interest to researchers and has an interest to people who are very sort of clued into quite deep thinking as you introduce the piece. But it's also a very exciting idea from the point of view of the general public, if only they could access it in a very sort of an easier way to understand. So the last two books I've written, which is Ezekiel 1 and Follow the Horse, have been a sort of fictionalized ways of understanding what's going on, and created a sort of Dan Brown type thriller to do with conspiracy and a little bit of science fiction as well, and these quirky Anunnaki people described by Zecharia Sitchin. And I've thrown those into sort of a melting pot of ideas in order to make the Dark Star an understandable phenomenon. And it's been relatively successful because people who would otherwise not necessarily want to sit down and read a quite a heavy alternative knowledge science book can read a something good thriller and enjoy it, and still at the end of that come away with a bunch of new ideas that they sort of ruminate.
Yeah, it's important that a spoonful of sugar does help the medicine go down.
Yeah.
And a lot of the information that comes out of scientific facts, if it was truly brought out in its cold terms, would probably scare the bejesus out of us,
Yes,
so,
I absolutely agree.
So I like the way you've done it, because you are still giving them the information, or enough information for them to actually use their intelligence.
I think at a format it works. It has its risks insofar as you run the risk of losing a certain amount of credibility because you start writing fiction. So people think, oh well, it's just fiction, but really it's an art form. It's a way of actually sort of taking these ideas and putting them out there. And part of the problem with writing non-fiction about things like the Anunnaki and Nibiru and so on is that you necessarily have to speculate, because those stories are wrapped up already within sort of ancient writings. And Zecharia Sitchin does an amazing job of bringing out these flesh and blood gods and the planet X Nibiru and describing them, but they're interpreted from texts written in ways that we don't normally describe. And so what I've done is to try and take those ideas and mixed in my own dark star ideas about the brown dwarf and so on, and put them into the modern world that we can all relate to, and try and understand what it would be like if those guys were still around. You know, if the Anunnaki was still here, if there was an alien presence on our world that was pulling the strings behind the national governments and the sort of New World Order. And that is an idea that it lends itself to fantastic fiction, but sometimes if you try and put it through a non-fiction format, like, say, David Icke does, it just sounds too fantastic. So it's a calculated risk, but I think it works.
We chased an article that we were thinking of doing a show some months ago, and we chased an article on the bloodline of the kings and queens of Europe. And the further we got into the bloodline, the more obvious it became that there are people, maybe nefarious or otherwise, who are controlling the destiny of man on Earth. Now, you could call it the New World Order, the Anunnaki. I don't know. But Andy managed to bring that query and tie it with the return of the Anunnaki and Planet X in a very bold way. And I must admit, I like the connection. Well, the three books, the way I see it, the Dark Star kind of lays out the evidence. And then Ezekiel 1, although it's fiction, it is based upon Planet X, 2012, the conspiracies, and then the Followers of Horus, where you introduce the Anunnaki to the mix, I think is the cream of the crop. It brings a lot of your research to bear, in a medicine that is coated with enough sugar, you know, that people can digest it willingly.
And it's quite a dark book, The Followers of Horus. I mean, I've only just had that published, so it's really only just starting to sort of settle into the consciousness of my readers, really. But the idea behind that book is to try and understand what the motivations would be of the Anunnaki now. I mean, take, for instance, the possibility that some of these guys, some of these ancient gods, never left our world. Yeah, there was a film 20 years ago called Highlander, which had an immortal living amongst men. And a fascinating story, because he would obviously never age, but he would sort of take a wife, and his wife would then age in front of his eyes, and then she'd be gone. And those kind of ideas have kind of stuck with me. And so how would an Anunnaki go about his business in this world? It would be their natural inclination to just try and take over and be the head of a multinational company or the head of a nation. But after a short while, it would become clear that they didn't age compared to everyone else, and their true nature would be understood by people, and therefore they would be rejected as aliens and so on. So my whole sort of cunning approach to this is to try and see how they would survive amongst us in a dark, sort of shadowy way, pulling the strings, being around, influencing things, making things happen, but never actually coming out into the light of the public's eye in a way that that they would be exposed.
That they would be exposed as non-aging or as ancient ones, if you will.
Yeah, and in that way, they're essentially kind of the New World Order. You know, they're these characters behind the power, but they're still fighting, because that's what they always did. Enlil, Enki, they were brothers. They fought each other in the sense of trying to dominate and try and have power, and their characteristics are very different. And I wanted to take those ideas, those very ancient, mythical ideas, and use those in this sort of modern context, and create a sort of fictionite scenario in a Dan Brown sort of way. So I hope I've succeeded with that. I think I've produced some quite exciting, interesting fiction. But you know, whether it gets made into movies or whether it sort of takes off, only time will tell.
Exactly, but at the same time, the information is there, and you know, if you pick away at the storyline, there's information there that has some very direct bearing on society. Because you spoke, for instance, in Ezekiel 1, you used the reporter as kind of a cameraman, if you will,
right?
And you know, that really hit home, because you can imagine that reporter. It has a tangible body, if you will, and I think that's important when you're trying to bring the information that we bring regarding UFOs and regarding the Anunnaki and all of these possibilities from ancient history. To bring them forward, you need to give them body, and I think you managed to do that, Andy. I truly do. And
I'm glad to hear you say that. I think it's fair to say that oftentimes with all of us, we live in our own sort of little world, which is of tremendous value, but an event is often required to open our eyes up to other possibilities and the broader context that we sort of swim around in, the ocean in which we swim. And if you can put yourself into a situation like a character in a book where you relate to them as a normal person going about their daily business like you, and then suddenly they're confronted with these absolutely extraordinary events that are mind-blowing and have to deal with that and come to grips with it, then that's much easier than just sitting there in an auditorium and listening to a speaker trying to tell you that there's a new world paradigm that you've got to understand, and you think, well, that's fine, but how does that relate to my life?
Yeah, and I can relate to the method that you use, because we do space flight, time travel, wormholes, dimensional shifts, ghost spirits. We do a number of things on the night zone, and at times it is difficult to get that vision out to the audience, for them to be able to pick up what we are seeing, or what we see, without giving them charts and video. Audio can be difficult when it comes to presenting a package, but your book has done just that, and it's packaged it in such a way that it's presentable, it's worth reading, and it has enough of a fictional twist to keep you interested in, well, I wonder how he got himself out of this one. Had we advertised this show, and had we promoted the show, then we would have had all kinds of technical glitches. As it happens, we ran almost flawlessly. Now, some would say that's just the luck of the draw. Some would say that it's possible there's some kind of conspiracy there. Now, I don't know. I'm not the expert. I just bring the experts on air to give us those answers. Andy Lloyd, author, ufologist, part of the cosmic conspiracy team out of the UK. What an impressive man. The Anunnaki, in your last book, The Followers of Horus, the Anunnaki, I wasn't quite sure, were they here dormant, or were they active, like you say, within the New World Order? Are these people that just perpetually in the shadows of power, do you think?
The characters that I have, the Enki character is a kind of a messianic character, right. And in Sitchin he relates the character Enki from ancient myths. He's a sort of a god of medicine, and he helped to sort of forge us in the image of the gods and brought forth humanity. And then when the flood occurred, which was an event that Sitchin thinks was triggered by a sort of a passing of this planet Nibiru, the dark star, what have you. Enki was the one who said, well, actual fact, I think I want to save humanity. I don't want them destroyed. We'll take Zeussutra or Utnapishtim or Noah, or whoever he was, depending on which pantheon you're talking about, right. And we'll allow him to take his family and survive by building this sort of submarine ark thing. And so he has to be the good guy. I mean, he has to be the good guy. But in Ezekiel 1, I start by having him as this sort of shadowy tool man who is behind the scenes. You don't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy, and he appears to be lurking in such a way. He keeps popping up at all the wrong moments and the dangerous moments. And you think he might be behind the awful events that occur in that book. And then as we move through into the second book, The Followers, it becomes clear that he is actually someone who's actually trying to stop something awful happening. He believes that by sending this spaceship Ezekiel 1 to Nibiru, that there is a risk that the sort of wrath of the Anunnaki will be let loose, and that there'll be an invasion, and they'll come here, and that humanity, his little project, humanity will be at risk. So he is attempting to sabotage the whole project. Now, his brother Enlil doesn't really play a part in the first book, but in the second book he comes forward, and he's essentially the mastermind behind the Ezekiel 1 space black project. And Enlil in Sitchin's books is Yahweh. He's a sort of god. He's the main man. He's in charge of all the wars and the battles, and he's the guy, the jealous god, the guy you don't want to get upset.
Gotcha.
So again, in the book, Mr. Lil, as I call him, Enlil, he's a sort of a cantankerous, jealous figure who is a control freak. He doesn't like the fact that the crew on the ship start doing things the way they want to do them. He gets upset, he gets cross, and he messes with them, and he plays games with them, as I believe Yahweh does in the Bible. He sort of messes with people and messes with their heads and tries to control them. Right. So I've tried to keep to that character again. And then the third character is in these books is Marduk, who's the sort of Lord of Babylon, the god of Babylon, and he's a sort of a darker, macabre figure who is power mad, a megalomaniac, wants to control everything like Enlil, but is more powerful and is capable of sort of extending power over huge amounts of people and getting them to do what he wants. And he's like the really bad guy. He's the guy who's on the ship, and he is going to cause problems, because if and when he gets to Nibiru, we don't know what his I haven't written what his motivation is, but it's clearly nefarious.
Right.
And he's like this very, very dark figure, not to be messed with at all, really to be avoided. And then these poor people who are running this ship find themselves at his mercy.
Right.
So those are the three guys, and that's how I envisaged it. And as I was describing before, Enki was somebody who was around at the time, and like the guy from Highlander would just pop up every so often to help. Lil is sort of someone who's just created a financial dominion, but is a very secretive New World Order figure. Right. And then Marduk, Sitchin has him as effectively someone who died. You know, he's supposed to be dead, but in my book, he effectively comes back to life on his tomb and is, you know, resuscitated and brought back. So,
now, the references that you are making to these characters, this is from the book There Were Giants Upon the Earth by Zachariah Sitchin, right?
Yes, I mean, Sitchin's written, I don't know, about 10 books, I suppose. Yeah. His first one being The 12th Planet back in 1976, and he's just released the book There Were Giants Upon the Earth. I suppose the book that he's written that most encapsulates the history, the Sumerian history of these gods is the Lost Book of Enki, which is a very old book. He wrote it almost in the form of an ancient text that's been translated into English. And part of it fits in very well with text that we know, and then other parts of it he's effectively sort of said, well, these are the lost bits that haven't been found, but in order to make the whole story cohesive and fit together, I've sort of made stuff and slotted all this in.
And is there anybody out there? You know, it's a question that I guess man has been pondering for a very, very long time. Is there anybody out there? Are we alone? Well, if we are alone, if we are it in this universe, then I'd say we are in deep, deep, deep trouble. If we are the most intelligent thing out there, we've got some problems in River City. We don't know what to do with our garbage. Now, a question I asked a scientist some time ago, a couple of questions, and I never did get an answer, but I will get the answers. I promise you that. One question was, is there any more water on the Earth than there was a million years ago? That's the first question I'd like to know. Has the mass of water changed on the Earth in a million years? And the second question I want to know is, if we are traveling so darn fast throughout the universe, then by the time we realize Planet X is upon us, it's upon us. There's not much we can do. It's like crashing into a car at an intersection that you have absolutely no chance of stopping. It's being sideswiped. And if it does miss us, then the electronic exchange between the two planets is going to be horrendous. And we're having kind of a philosophical discussion down in the virtual studio tonight. I have a good friend, Return Guidebook, is down in the studio, and we're discussing the fact of the ancients knowing what was going on. How did they know? How could they write in the Old Testament items and accuracies that are so spot on, it is scary? How can that be? How did Nostradamus look into a pool of water and see the atrocities that he wrote of? How can that be? Is it possible that these are abilities that we all have, and only a few have managed to hold on to that special ability? Or is it some wisdom that's coming from elsewhere? And that's the problem we face, as we hear of those elsewheres. And we hear of our good friend David Baker, who speaks to passed on spirits and helps them and helps the loved ones that are left behind. Will we finally get to see them? If Nibiru, Planet X, is not a cataclysmic event for the Earth, then it is, as John Hogue has reported it to be, a changing time, a time of enlightenment and a time of knowing. And if we can get to that time of knowing, then it is quite possible we might actually have peace on Earth. However, I won't be holding my breath for that. Not anytime soon. Not even with the second coming of Christ, or the Magi, or anything else you want to call it. Well, this week the Calgary Stampede is upon us here in Calgary. Those who are familiar with Calgary, or those who usually follow the show on archive download, we are in 4 days into the Calgary Stampede, the greatest outdoor show on Earth. The yearly event got underway on Friday with over 200 float parade, marking a 98 years since the first Stampede in 1912. In the years since, the annual festival has grown to attract as many as 1.2 million attendees to its unique mix of concerts, midway rides, and rodeo competitions, featuring approximately $2 million in prizes. And the parties. Oh, yes, the parties. Open beer gardens, saloon girls, and real as well as urban cowboys, daytime music stages and performers, and of course dozens of daily free pancake breakfasts. Throughout the city, pancakes, Canadian maple syrup, Canadian sausages and crispy Canadian bacon, and campfire Canadian coffee. Although, I gotta tell you, I still prefer Timmy's. Oh, yummy, yum, yum, the Calgary Stampede is truly the greatest show on earth. You know, some people spend 10 days vacationing here, visiting various free pancake breakfasts hosted all around town by the merchants. And then they hit the Stampede grounds for a day, and then end up in the evening in the wee hours at some cowboy party somewhere, hosted by other various merchants. Others, they enjoy the heritage and history of the Wild, Wild West, known as the Calgary, Alberta, with a world-class Glenbow Museum and a huge downtown convention center nestled within historic buildings. The ghost tours of downtown are legendary. So Google Calgary Stampede. Make it a point of coming next year for your vacation, and I can assure you that breakfast is on us. Now there, I've done my public service announcement like a good little Canadian soldier should. Can we get on with it now? And we are back with Andy Lloyd, and we're going to be talking about some more Planet X, and we're just waiting for Network to come back. And there we go. Andy Lloyd, author of a number of books, The Dark Star, The Planet X Evidence, Ezekiel 1, a novel based upon Planet X conspiracies of 2012, and The Followers of Horus, where Andy introduces the Anunnaki to the mix. So Andy, obviously the information and research required to produce such work, it has to be a labor of love.
I got into this in the late 1990s, and I was very taken with a lot of UFO books and the work of people who are looking into sort of ancient history and trying to understand whether there is alternative history going on. And I've always enjoyed reading those. So yes, it is a labour of love. I find it thoroughly enjoyable. I'm fascinated by the entire subject. And why I got, I've worked with David and Martin on Cosmic Conspiracies. We produced this very, very big website towards the beginning of the new century. The Dark Star theory sort of came out of that as a sort of an offshoot. Because I wanted to explore this idea of this brown dwarf. I enjoyed reading Mr. Kitchen's work, but I had a big problem with the idea that a planet was developed and evolved in the same way as us. Right. So I put forward this idea that there had to be a sort of a system out there with this dark star, and Nibiru had to be a planet that would orbit the dark star, and in the same way that Jupiter's moons are warmed up by Jupiter, and that mechanism would work in deep space as well and produce a sort of habitable world. And the science of that works, which I'm very happy with. The problem with it is that, if there is indeed a problem with it, is that obviously when you're talking about a brown dwarf, or a sub-brown dwarf, you're talking about a sort of Jupiter-sized planet, which arguably is much more difficult to miss than terrestrial worlds that are very, very extreme distance. So, but I think having spent years exploring the science of this, it's become clear to me that the outer solar system, to a great extent, is like is a total mystery. And I've used the analogy before, which is very useful, that if you imagine your garden, a very long garden that you've got at night time, it's pitch black outside, and you are sitting at your window looking out into the garden, and there's a light behind you that's sort of shining from the window, and you peer out into the darkness. The patio in front of you, you could see little things on the patio, and if you imagine that being sort of the solar system where we live, you might be able to see the planets being on the patio, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But the darkness beyond, nothing in the garden is lit sufficiently by the light from your window, and it's just plunged into darkness. So that's the outer solar system, and beyond the current planet, much beyond there, we know practically nothing about the outer solar system. And the understanding that we all have, that astronomers understand everything about the solar system, is, well, astronomers don't believe that, but people have this feeling that's the case. So my work challenges that and says there's a lot to learn out there. This planet could well be out there, and as we were saying before, within a couple of years, the evidence could well come forward to substantiate that such a body exists.
There's not much question at all, but there's life throughout the universe. We're not alone in the universe at all. No, for sure we're not alone. Now, life-bearing planet. I happen to be privileged enough to be in on the fact that we have been visited on this planet, and the UFO phenomenon is real, although it's been covered up by our governments for quite a long time.
You are in the Night Zone on blogtalkradio.com.
And it is being covered up by the governments. It is obvious the governments know a heck of a lot more than they are saying about what's going on out there in the universe. There's a lot of eyes out in the sky. But Marshall Masters had mentioned to me some months ago, and I hadn't given it much thought until recently, but he mentioned that most of our astronomy is done directly above us, if you understand what I'm saying. And we rely on other areas of the globe to give us their astronomy and the likes. So the least amount of telescopic work or the least amount of scientific progress has been made from the southern portion of our Earth. And this is theorized why we have not seen Planet X, because it is coming in through a southern direction. Now, if that's true or false, only time will tell. And as we've been speaking down in the virtual studio, there are many possible outcomes if Planet X exists or not. The outcomes are endless, but the final goal, I would hope, is we will either scare ourselves into peace or we will destroy ourselves into peace. I think it will be a golden age and an opportunity to finally take the trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars from the military hardware and turn it into something good. But that's just me. So, you know, I don't know where to take it other than that. Reality Bites. When you wrote the book and you considered sending this spacecraft secretly to rendezvous with Nibiru, did you ever consider alternate powers of being able to get through that distance? Or is this based on technology of, say, mid-90s? Would that be a fair request?
That is an absolutely brilliant question, because if you could look at it, as you say, entirely two ways. One of them is you look at the what's available to us, which is effectively just advanced rocket propulsion,
right,
and try and understand how we would send men on a long-distance flight. Now, the main problem, well, there's several huge problems involved, and of course, there's a lot of discussion about going to the moon and going to Mars, which NASA has thought about and think about, and then do a little bit of work on, and then realise it's beyond them. Part of the problem is how people survive physically and psychologically for a long period of time in space, which is one of the themes I explore in the book, and the way they have to keep themselves physically and mentally up together, and how that actually is just pie in the sky, because people are people and things just kind of disintegrate. So that's one of the things I explore. In terms of propulsion, a rocket really isn't going to do it. When you're talking about sending a huge, however big a spaceship you want, but you're sending it out beyond Neptune and out towards the interstellar space, really,
yeah,
then you need to have a different propulsion system. So what I chose to do is have an idea that Stanton Friedman talked about. He's a great Canadian, isn't he? Stanton Friedman. And in one of his recent books, he describes how there is this sort of myth generated by debunkers that says that aliens could not visit our world because there is simply not a sort of available technology to transfer spaceships through sort of light year distance. And he says, well, that's just simply blunt, because if you take nuclear-powered nuclear fission and you create a drive from that, effectively what you're doing is you can fire out from this sort of fissile material, you can fire out sort of I'm trying to think, effectively the exhaust coming out of the back of the spaceship is sort of the byproducts of the fissionable material. And they're ejected at such sort of speed that it creates a significant force that over time, because the spaceship is not slowed by anything at all in space, over time you can gradually accelerate to immense speed. So I've taken his idea and I've sort of taken that to heart and tried to imagine a spaceship that's going forward for half of the voyage, gradually accelerating up to sort of mind-blown speeds. And then in order to be able to arrive at its destination, it has to kind of flip over halfway through the journey and then sort of slam the brakes on in exactly the same way.
Kind of a slide into home base.
Exactly. And so this space journey that I've sort of produced in the book sort of runs for 15 years, 7.5 of which is slowly accelerating, and the other 7.5 is slowly decelerating.
Right.
So that sort of creates the context of the book. Now, you're perfectly right. What I could have done would be to sort of go into sort of a whole Roswell thing and say, well, you know, if you back-engineered a crashed saucer and you looked at the sort of anti-gravity propulsion or whatever it is that runs those things,
right,
and then engineered something from that in Area 51 to create some sort of interstellar wormhole, light year speed drive thingy-jig, then, yeah, you get blip, you're where you want to go. But from my point of view, that it almost removes the human drama because it makes it just so easy in a Star Trek way to just sort of say, right, warp speed, Scotty.
And probably take away those fallible elements of human that make up the story in itself. You know.
And in Moscow recently, and I'm sure you've probably come across this, Colin, but they took about 6 guys, I think, and they put them in this bunker down in the bottom of a warehouse, sealed them up and said, right, in 18 months' time, we're going to come and get you out. And they're seeing how they sort of psychologically cope with living in this sort of enclosed environment, recycling. Right. But I have also, in the Followers of Horus, introduced the sort of Roswell thing where you've got... Right. But I have also, in the Followers of Horus, introduced the sort of Roswell thing where you've got these flying saucers, and I'm not going to tell you why because I want people to read it and hear about it, but I do introduce into the story these sudden ships that suddenly start about and are driven about by someone else and make everyone go, oh my goodness, what's going on here? Right. So I kind of brought that into it, and it's almost like you've got this very slow, very, very antiquated ship flying out from Earth to this Nibiru, and suddenly they get, you know, they come across these darting around UFOs, kind of looking at them like they're watching the Titanic. I find that kind of a funny concept, really.
Yeah, you know, and I think so too. I mean, we have barely found a method of escaping Earth's gravity. Famed or supposedly made it to the moon and back. We've got rovers on Mars, but we as mankind have spent a great deal of effort trying to break the gravitational boundaries of Earth, and I think we are the Henry Fords of the space industry.
You can have any color you want as long as it's black.
Exactly. You know, I think we're so basic in our thinking, and if there are species out there in the outer space and in the universe, which according to mathematicians just positively has to be, we cannot be the only species in this great void. It is almost mathematically impossible. So
it would also be extremely dull.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I mean, everything about the world in which we live has a thriving life, biodiversity. You know, you go from one country, one continent to another, and all the life different. The oceans are teeming with varied life, and the evolution brings all these different forms down the ages. Well, how on earth can the rest of the universe not be exactly like that? Exactly. And the only thing that prevents us from finding out is obviously the vast distances. We're, you know, stuck in this little bubble floating around in the middle of nowhere, and we're incapable, unfortunately, of seeing the vast variety of life, because I'm quite convinced that life is seeded here, it's been brought here by comets, that the structural DNA is something that's evolved in the universe long, long, long before the sun ever came into existence. And you know, the sun just kind of popped into existence through, you know, the physical by the dust from supernovas, and then this visitation of these interstellar comets would bring life here and get it all going again, like a great cycle, a recycling cycle. Life's everywhere, and it's something to be celebrated, but we're unfortunately just not able to see it right now.
Well, and time and space being the killer, because that is what is preventing us from exploration, is the fact of the distance between, you know, what could be a habitable planet of any kind of consequence would be 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 lifetimes before we would actually get there. So I agree with you. The time and space continuum is the key. And if you believe in Einstein's theories and the theories of others, you know, there is a method, they believe, of some kind of travel that doesn't involve the lineage of A to B. So, you know, will it be in our lifetime? I doubt it, Andy. But do you think the government is out there actively investigating these types of possibilities? Do you think there's research, you know, wet ops or black ops or dark ops?
It was very clear that they certainly were at one point. Now, during the Cold War, the UFO subject was clearly something the FBI and I mean, it's just a matter of record. They were fascinated by the subject in the same way that many members of the public were fascinated by it, and they were quite worried about it as well. Ufology field from sort of 47 onwards is full of sort of intervention by government and through various agencies, and there was clearly a cover-up going on of quite a large proportion. Now, what the nature of the UFOs were, I think, is still an open question. And personally, I think the extraterrestrial hypothesis is the likely answer. But it may be interdimensional. It may be that that there's it may even be that there's some sort of source to do with our own planet. But what Dark Star Theory, they can Google Andy Lloyd. They'll find me. I'm also an artist. They'll be able to see my paintings online as well. So Andy Lloyd, Google me, and my books are available in Amazon in the UK.